Welcome to Forgotten, Not Forsaken, a podcast of Christian Witness to Israel, North America. My name is Gregg Kite. I'm the media director for CWI NA, and I have with me Stephen Atkinson, who's the director of ministry. Say hello, Stephen.
Hi, it's good to be with you, Greg. And again, thank you for your wizardry in being able to operate all of these things and make this happen in the media that goes beyond this old guy. But thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. So the purpose of this podcast is, there's a few reasons that we want to put something like this together. First and foremost, in my opinion, I think I've seen a lot of people who, while they really are craving resources and they want to read about this stuff or they want to hear about the work that's being done in missions, and particularly in Jewish missions in North America, there's not a whole lot of people who want to necessarily read through every article all the time or have the time to sit down and go through a large amount of resources, but they can sit and listen to a podcast for 15 or 20 minutes. And so that's the goal of this podcast. We want to keep them short and sweet, but also make them accessible so that people have something to listen to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, we've been, again, discussing in our local church group this morning even, about the worth of online material, the worth of the digital world as opposed to the physical world. And again, we live in a COVID or semi-post-COVID age, and we do now really do desire the physical. So why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this kind of as a lead-in to bring people to an awareness, if they're listening in the online world, an awareness of the situation of Jewish mission, particularly as it pertains to North America, but also then, I trust, as a lead-in to even some physical engagement. That is, I, as the director, engage with many churches all across the country, and I do that very much in the flesh, and so I'm traveling 30 or 40,000 miles a year by car, traveling to many, many different churches and many different individuals to attempt to build that burden for Jewish mission, not least to build support, but more effectively, really, to build the prayer burden and interest and awareness of the mission field, the Jewish mission field that we have here on our doorstep. So again, long story short, the podcast is a lead into that so that I can engage in the physical and meet with folks perhaps that are listening at various parts of the country and would like me to come and visit and preach or teach or just, again, grow the burden at whatever way that may be, either individually or in local congregations. And then also as part of this podcast and as we develop it, we will be pulling in my colleague and missionary, Mitch Tepper, and he will be given the perspective of a frontline missionary, and in terms of not only seeking prayer for his own labors, but also seeking to just stimulate and challenge individuals in their own personal witness to Jewish people. So from those two perspectives, from getting from the online into the actual physical and real world, and from the two perspectives of church engagement and Jewish people engagement, this is what I certainly desire from this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we should definitely go back a couple of steps. Then we need to explain, what is CWI NA? What is Christian Witness to Israel, North America? You touched on a lot of the things that you do. And you even, I think, hinted at sort of the mission statement. So maybe we can start with the mission statement of the organization and then more, elaborate on that just a little bit.
Sure. Well, without giving you the full 501c3 detailed exact mission statement, our ministry falls into two areas, and that is both historically from where we began in our ministry way back in the UK in 1842, right through to today, both in terms of the principle in which we engage in mission, but also pragmatically because of the particular mission field in which we find ourselves in the USA. So CWI NA, or Christian Witness to Israel, North America, is quite simply a gospel ministry to the Jewish people that began really out of a burden of the Scottish Presbyterians way back in 1842. It was their burden, their theological burden, their biblical burden, that God was not finished with the Jewish people, and that he had unfulfilled promises and unfulfilled purposes for the ancient people. And so out of that arose a ministry to reach the Jewish people, particularly in London. And it was through the Church of Scotland, as it was then, that initiated but an interdenominational ministry to the Jewish people in London. But there was a financial investment of some 500 British pounds in 1842 from the Church of Scotland that enabled a ministry to begin in London, and under the oversight of many churchmen in the London area, but particularly those of a Reformed and Presbyterian ilk that began the work. Although having said that, I repeatedly say to my Baptist brethren that C.H. Spurgeon was involved in the ministry in his day, and in actually fact he preached 4 times at least for the ministry, which is now called Christian Witness to Israel North America, if we can claim the parentage right through to the McShane days and the Spurgeon days. But again, to go back to what exactly we are, I'm reminded of a comment by one of the general secretaries of CWI, or the British Society for the Propagation of the Gospel Among the Jews, as it was known then. Way back in 1940s, he was writing on the anniversary, on the 100th anniversary indeed, of the beginning of the mission. And he saw 2 specific aims and 2 specific needs, really, for the church and for the Jewish people. And that was that the Jewish people would hear the glorious gospel and be divinely attracted to the Lord Jesus Christ and that glorious gospel of his death and resurrection for sinners, of the Messiah Jesus. And that General Secretary also made mention of the second purpose of the ministry was to awaken the conscience of the Christian church. And that really struck a chord with me, particularly as I moved over here some 10 years ago. I'm losing my accent very badly, but originally I was the CWI representative in Ireland, and in 2012 I was sent forth, as it were, by the body in the UK to come over here and set up over here with similar aims in that sense. Although the longer I've been here, the more I realize both the privilege and the opportunity that we have here in the USA that is somewhat distinct from any other region of the world. And we can come on to that in a little moment. But again, just summarizing our 2 main areas concerns that bringing the gospel frontline to Jewish people, and in that secondary sense, the stirring the heart and conscience of the church for Jewish mission, and then for the practicalities of doing that within the context of the United States, where 6 million Jewish people reside.
Right. And, you mentioned in there that, you're a Presbyterian, I'm a Reformed Baptist, but this goal, this work should be really an ecumenical work, that everyone should be interested in the salvation of our brothers. And I think that that's really helpful as far as the goals of this organization.
Yes, absolutely. It's and particularly those of a Reformed and Presbyterian ilk. I think I often say that the Presbyterians were at the forefront of Jewish mission from the get-go. We can even date that renewed burden for Jewish mission right back to the time of the Reformation. In many respects, I consider the Roman Catholic Church to be the ultimate in the replacement theology camp. In other words, in many respects, they saw themselves as the replacement of Israel and had their own priestcraft and all manner of sacrifices. But the Reformation really did change everything. And through that, those who have a strong Reformed theology have always had an interest in Jewish mission. And I could quote from the larger catechism, Westminster Standards, and see how way back in the early 1600s, Jewish mission was front and center of world mission. And so that's really why I seek to try and rebuild a relationship with Reformed churches, because in some ways the ministry to the Jewish people is something that has been forgotten, and that kind of leads in a little to why we've named this podcast "Forgotten, Not Forsaken."
Right, and so I know that that name, "Forgotten Not Forsaken," is near and dear to your heart, and you've assigned several different things that particular name. And so, why don't you explain, I guess, sort of the significance of the name and where it came from, and how it applies to even just the podcast.
Sure, I'm not sure. I can't claim ownership of the name. I'm not sure that it was something that I initially came up with. It's certainly been something in the world of Jewish missions, and maybe so. I definitely won't claim ownership, and it's just been out there. But it's a very helpful title, and indeed for us as we begin to use and do this podcast for the purposes for which we've already stated. I think it summarizes very well that there is a sense in which Jewish mission, Jewish evangelism has been forgotten. And in the larger sense, the Jewish people have been forgotten. But biblically, theologically, they ought not to be, because they have not been forsaken. And the point that I regularly make is that theology drives missiology. And if your theology is askew or just downright wrong, your missiology will be wrong, or in wrong areas. And so I stress again back to that Reformed basis for Jewish mission, which really renewed that interest in Jewish mission. So they realized that pre-Reformation there was a forgetting the ancient people. And so in some ways, I want to bring that, again, front and center, another little phrase we've used, restore to the radar. We want to restore to the radar Jewish mission. I have so many good friends in many different Reformed churches, both Baptist and Presbyterian. But sometimes I find that there is still a forgetfulness. And again, the world in which we live, we kind of don't really know history very well. And I think we don't really know church history very well. And part of what we might do even in this podcast is just to rehearse a little of history or church history, and realize that the ancient people have been somewhat forgotten, maybe even by good churches. And we want to make sure that they are not forgotten, because certainly they've not been forsaken by the Lord. In fact, some people have said to me, well, if God is finished with Israel, he has a funny way of showing it, because in the sense they're still here. And indeed, as you learn history, or as you learn Jewish history, the providences of God are stunning. And I think it's those things that we want to bring to mind to our listeners, as we think through, why are they still here? What is the providence of God in that? And if they're not fully forsaken, and indeed, if you tie this in with Romans 11, we see that there is a partial hardening has come upon Israel, and it's not a complete hardening. So if there is a partial forsakenness, but not a full forsakenness, then we are longing with the Reformers and many, many others for that restoring and that redemption of Israel. And again, to take Romans 11, the taking up of the natural branches and then grafting again into the vine. One of the little illustrations that I sometimes use is that if someone had a serious accident in which one of their fingers was cut off, sorry, that's a little graphic, but if someone had one of their fingers cut off, they would not say, well, it's okay, I've got 9 others, so I'll just leave that one there. No, you will take the finger and you will take it to a master surgeon who will very carefully bring that finger back to some life by grafting it back in to the rest of the hand. And in a similar sense, we have a picture in Romans 11 of broken off branches, not cast away branches, but broken off branches. And we're reminded in Romans 11 that God is able to graft them in again. So my longing and desire is so that they will not be forgotten by the believing church, but rather we will be much in prayer that those fingers, that those natural branches will be taken to the master surgeon and grafted in again. So they have been forgotten, but they're not forsaken. And I want us also not to forsake to bring the message to the Jewish people.
Absolutely. And I think that that is another reason why it's so apt of a name for this podcast is that we know that they're not forsaken, but we do want the church and we want the people who are who do have the good news of Christ to be able to not forget. And so the goal of this podcast really is to help that particular part of it, and we want to make sure that people are not forgetting the natural branches, as you say.
Amen.
All right. And so all that to say, looking forward from here, what you guys can expect is interviews, obviously more with Stephen. We'll have more time talking with him about various things in the ministry. We'll have interviews with Mitch Tepper, who is the kind of staff missionary who resides in Squirrel Hill, Pittsburgh. And you can expect some stories from him, both about his own conversion and his own life, as well as his work in the ministry. And so that will be helpful as well. Stephen, what other kinds of things can we expect?
Sure. I'll just lead in because we're still very early days in this, but simply lead in perhaps to the next one. And I know you've already recorded some interviews, and a good bit of editing is needed because, as you'll discover, my listeners, from Mitch Tepper, he is a little bit like myself, and that there's some Irishness in him because he has kissed the Blarney Stone. And he can talk and talk and talk, and that's what makes him a very effective missionary, obviously, as well. But we'll be doing a little bit of editing, but we have something of Mitch's story as a Brooklyn Jew, born anew, as I sometimes call him. He's a Jewish man that came to faith way back in the 70s. He is a man with a great seniority of years and much of life's experiences. But the particular life experience that we want to hear about is how he came to faith, and then indeed how he ultimately came into the Jewish mission. He went to seminary in his late 50s, as you do. And it was at that Reformed Presbyterian Theological Seminary in Pittsburgh that I met him some 5 or 6 years ago as I was giving lectures on Jewish mission. And our hearts were knit, and he ultimately then became our missionary on the streets of Squirrel Hill and indeed elsewhere. So you're going to hear his fascinating story. You're going to hear also then in future studies or future podcasts rather, some of the nature of the conversations that he has week by week in Squirrel Hill and in South Florida, and even conversations with his own atheist dad and his other family members. And so these are fascinating things that you won't want to miss. We will be, in that sense, wedding theology with streetwise practical missionary stories and wisdom. And so I hope that both in terms of the theology and the practicalities, there will be a good balance for all the listeners to be involved with us in prayer and not forgetful, because they have not been forsaken by the Lord.
Absolutely. Well, I think that the last thing I would like to leave you guys with is any resources. If you can't wait, if you just are really excited about this and you want to get more information and you want to jump the gun a little bit, there's a lot of information and resources you can get from our website, which is just CWINA.org. And if you go there, there's resources from historic prints of the Herald magazine, that was the magazine that was put out by the organization, as well as our Voices from the Past series. You can find the PDFs of those series, which are reprints of historic sermons and writings from people like Robert Murray McShane and Charles Spurgeon, who we've mentioned already. And so if you want to find more of those resources, definitely head there. Did you have anything to add?
The only other little thing that we've been recently put up, and it's taken us a year, and I know you've been heavily involved in it, and that is our Awakening the Conscience course, taken from that little phrase of the General Secretary of some 80 years ago, awakening the conscience of the church. We have 20 sermons stroke lectures that are available to be listened to, both in terms again of theology, of scripture, of scriptural sermons, and then also historical lectures. And again, some of the stories that we want to bring up, maybe even briefly in this podcast, and make you think about wanting to listen a little further. Concerns, where did the Jewish people come from? Why are they here? Again, why providentially are they here? And so that will lead us into, well, how can we engage? How can the church engage in Jewish mission itself? And again, my ultimate desire is, if you're a church that's not in a Jewish area, I want you to be burdened. I want you to be prayerful, not forgetful. a church that is in a Jewish area, I want you to be intentional. I want you to be reaching. And in whatever way we can to help local churches engage in that way, we're there for you, and we want to assist. So this is a prompt. This is a prayer burden, and I greatly appreciate the listeners, and I hope there'll be many more in days to come.
Great. Well, listeners, if you are listening on Spotify or YouTube or Google Podcasts or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening, we would love for you to follow or subscribe and leave likes and reviews and things like that, so we can get this a little bit more visible, so that people are able to find the heart of what we're trying to do and not forget their Jewish brethren. Well, Stephen, if you have anything else to add, then we can...
It's all good. Again, thank you for the support. I am so grateful for the American churches and the friends that I have. I often simply say that there are three things that drive me. One, we have an American Jewish mission field. 42% of the world's Jewish population are living here. Two, we have the most pro-Israel country on the planet. Maybe aside from the land of Israel itself. Maybe the reasons are not always right or clear, but we nonetheless have a pro-Israel America. And then we have a very resourceful Christian public. We have a very strong, we can talk about the strength of the church, but truly in world terms, there is a strong evangelical presence here in these shores. We are blessed and very resourceful and very generous. And so the point that I often make, well, hey guys, let's get this done. If this is biblical, if this is the Lord's purposes for the ancient people yet to unfold, well then, my American cousins, please, let's get this done. We have prayer warriors and we have resourceful people. And I want to stir the hearts even of individuals who may even come on board with us and become a missionary or a worker in some shape or form. And I want to pray that the church will be mobilized to be remembering and restore to the radar the importance of Jewish mission. Thank you again, Gregg, for all you're doing for me and the way in which you're teaching me these modern devices and the way in which we get the message out. Amen. And may it multiply.
Amen. I'm happy and privileged to be part of the work, and I encourage you to be part of the work as well if you're listening, and find ways to do that. And if you want to, you can reach out to us through the contact form on the website, and we'll put email addresses in the descriptions of these audio broadcasts as well. So please join us next time on Forgotten Not Forsaken. We're so thankful for you for listening.
Thank you.
Forgotten, not forsaken.
Thanks for listening to Forgotten Not Forsaken. If you'd like to learn more about Christian Witness to Israel North America, please visit our website at www.cwina.org. Have a blessed day in the Lord.